Hi, I'm Zach, and I like to make all sorts of things. Sometimes when I make something particularly cool, like this guitar or this play kitchen for my daughter when she was 2 years old, people will say something to the effect of, "Wow, I would love to make something like that myself, but I don't have all those specialty tools." Well, what I want you to know is that there's a lot that you can do with the tools that you do have. You just might need to be a little creative about how you use them. So I'm going to show you how I made this video game joystick using scraps of wood like this, using nothing but this. Here I have a big block of wood made out of several thin pieces all glued together that I had left over from a different project before. And I'm going to try to make a fairly small arcade stick. So I'll start by trying to imagine what is the layout going to be. I have this joystick component here. I can kind of lay it on top, look at what sort of space it's going to take underneath, because I need to make sure that there's wood around all sides. And here I'll speed up most of this so that it doesn't take so long. If you'd like to watch all of this with no voiceover at 1x speed, it's much, much longer, but you can do that in this other video that I've linked here in the description. And so, maybe I can try the joystick, horizontal or vertical position. Really it's something this small, it's all about how we can try to fit it in here one way or another. And so I can trace some of the outline to try to get an idea of what the position should be. Unfortunately from this other joystick, I have a base plate left over, which I can use sort of as a guide to make it much easier to trace the little outline, trace the shapes, try to find where it's going to go. And then here, I'll check with my hand laid on the corner and determine where I think the buttons should be, where it would be comfortable. And this is telling me that I probably need to have the joystick moved a little further over to the left. Because you need to have room on the top so that your hands don't hit each other, and also nice amount of space underneath where the components come through. So yeah, just based on exactly where my fingertips fall, let's call that the position for the buttons. So that feels pretty good in this case. Now start to think about what the overall shape is going to be. Let's make something nice and ergonomic. It's comfortable to lay your palms on while you're playing for a long time. That's what we need here, I think. And then I'll take a punch to just try to mark sort of the center where I'm going to drill my pilot holes for the joystick shaft and for both of the buttons. And you can see I'm not really measuring here. I'm just really going to just kind of eyeball this. That's okay. This is just a fun little project using scraps of wood. And then I'll drill my pilot holes, which is really important. It gives you a nice guide when you come through with a larger bit to make some much more useful holes in there. And then flip it over, check underneath, because that's the all-important space where we're actually going to remove a lot of wood using these Forstner bits here. So I love Forstner bits. Like, this is a 2-inch bit. It drills a 2-inch wide flat bottom hole. And I'm going to be using this instead of a router because I don't have a router right now. But that's okay, we can get it done. In this case, I'm thinking, 2 inches is probably not wide enough to give all the space that we need in one pass for the joystick component to fit in there. So rather than that, see, it's not really going to fit. It's not going to be enough room. So I'd need to be cutting out those corners anyway. So in this case, it seems like a better option is to use a smaller bit with many, many more passes. So I will, first of all, a very important thing, when you're drilling holes through that are not supposed to go out the top surface, I just will check the depth of the drill bit and put a little piece of masking tape on, just sort of as a visual guide, so that I know how far is too far. It won't stop your drill, but it will give you something to look at to kind of eyeball how far you can go. And I do this all the time, because I've had way too many holes go way through in the past. Here, same thing with the Forstner bit. We're going to be drilling down with the Forstner bit to try to route out this wood to make a cavity underneath where the joystick component will fit. We want it to not come out the top, obviously. So here, the first thing I'll do is just kind of mark where I think these edges are going to be. I'm checking to make sure that I have things in the right position. And yeah, definitely. So here, this kind of will mark what the outline will be when I go through and drill a lot deeper. Now I think I need to anchor this down because these Forstner bits can really kick the piece of wood around, and I don't have like a proper drill press or anything. That's kind of the point of this video. We're just doing it with the tools that we have on hand. The Forstner bit, I mean, they make really fast work of soft woods like pine and poplar. So it's pretty fun to drill down through here. You see all the wood chips flying. The really cool thing about this is since I have these different layers glued together, and they're all sort of different colors, whether it's, you know, pine, which is very light in color, oak, which is darker and reddish, and then poplar, which can come in all sorts of colors. You know, I've seen poplar as light as pine or birch, but also as dark as like a walnut or something. I have a big thick piece of poplar that's very dark like walnut that I've been saving for a project. So that'll show up eventually. So here, yeah, we're just kind of doing what a router would do, just one Forstner bit hole at a time. Just removing a bunch of wood as much as possible. This saves a lot of time because then we don't have to get down there and chisel everything. And right about now is the time that I get sick of pulling out the pieces of wood by hand, so I flip it over and shake everything out, clean up the workbench, and then screw it back down to the bench so that we can continue working on the wood. And now I'm just trying to come back with multiple passes with the Forstner bit to try to make these roughly level at the bottom, because that's what we want ultimately for that joystick to seat. And then I can come in with my old and not at all sharp chisel. You know, I should probably just get a new set of chisels, but this is what I have laying around. Here you can really start to see some of the different colors of the wood. So those brownish, more dark chips, those are poplar. And then the surface that we're looking at below, that's nice and clean, or nice and light colored, that is pine coming through. So again, we're just trying to make a hole that is going to have enough room for the bottom of the joystick component to fit in there nicely. And it's about the right size now, so we can probably start to move on to some of the holes for the buttons. Let's see what that's going to look like. The buttons are 24 millimeter arcade buttons, but I'm going to drill much bigger holes underneath. Again, not all the way through to the top, but this is just a nice little sort of working area underneath. If the hole is bigger, it makes it much easier to attach the wires to the bottom of the joystick buttons. So here, you know, and it's very easy to locate these because I drilled those pilot holes all the way through earlier. And now the cavities underneath are in the general correct shape, but let's clean up the edges a little bit with my most indispensable tool that I have, which is my Dremel. And I'm just using a standard drum sander attachment on the end of this, and just it really makes pretty quick work of these little pieces of wood sticking out. Like the pine and the poplar, they just go very quickly, which are harder woods like oak or maple or walnut. You know, they're much slower, but these Dremel sanding drums will absolutely carve away that type of hardwood as well. So here, you know, things are looking pretty good. You can see the shape coming together. Now it's time to get ready for the wiring. Really, we're gonna have to run wires to the buttons and to the joystick, and the plan is to bring the cable from the console into the larger cavity where the joystick will sit, and then just have 4 little leads, you know, 2 little wires for each button will feed through this small channel between the 2 cavities over to plug onto the back of the buttons. It'll be nice and clean. So now this shape is the next thing to work on. We have these little flaps on the side that were sticking out that was very useful to attach this to the workbench before, but we don't need those anymore. So I'm going to cut those off and get ready to work on the shape of the body of the joystick. And since my goal here is to make the body of this joystick kind of an interesting rounded shape, I will need to be able to get down around the edges all the way. So I'm just tacking a piece of 2x4 onto the workbench to use as sort of a pedestal to lift the piece up higher. I'll attach the joystick body down to the 2x4, and now I can get down around the edges. And very important for this next step is I'm going to wear an N95 mask because I'm using a belt sander to sculpt this wood into the shape that I want. And a belt sander like this, I think I have like 80 grit or 100 grit belt on there. It goes very quickly and makes lots and lots of dust. I do not want to breathe that wood dust in. So, one of the nice things about us handling the COVID-19 pandemic is we all have N95 masks around. So here, you can just see, look how quickly the shape starts to come together, to take those sharp corners and start to round them off a little bit. And I don't really have a plan at this stage. I'm just kind of looking at the wood that's available and letting the wood grain and the different layers of the wood and the different colors kind of tell me what it wants the shape to be. I definitely want it to be rounded. Ergonomics are important. I want it to be comfortable under your palms while you're playing a game with the joystick. So you'll see me, checking the edges all the time to see what it feels like. And now, rather than just the edges, you can see I'm starting to bevel the top a little bit, because I have a vision that this will just be a nice smooth arc up around the edges and up to the top surface. Also along the front, take a little edge off of there. And then here, let's just remind ourselves very clearly, where these holes are underneath, because we don't want to sand through to the top and then have a big hole that leads down into those cavities underneath. That's not a fun thing to patch. Right here, this is great since it's up on this pedestal. I can just lay the belt sander down onto the workbench, and the belt completely covers the edge of the layers of the wood. You can really start to see those stripes come out at that point. This is why we use the different types of wood. I really like just the different natural colors of the different types of wood to make these cool stripes. And I just want to keep rounding until I get to a nice ergonomic but cool looking shape. And I'll also come up around the edges because it's going to be a smooth curve all the way up around to the top surface. Yeah, and just a reminder, if you want to see this at 1x speed, the video takes much longer, but just check the other video linked in the description, and you can watch that and not have to listen to my voiceover. So at this point, you can start to see that red or pinkish kind of oak start to peek out around the edges there. That's why I made it the second layer, so it contrasts so boldly with the poplar on top. Yeah, and then the further that the more we angle the edge up toward the top, the more you're able to see that oak stripe from all around the top of the joystick body. So then, I stop all the time to test and just, drop my palms on there, picture what it's going to feel like to actually play with this, make sure that we have the ergonomics that we're looking for, function over form on this. And this is fantastic because, realizing that a different angle on those front corners would be more comfortable, it's a great coincidence. It's also going to make it look cooler because you could start to see multiple layers going down, all showing up on the top surface. Same along the front. I want that, especially that oak stripe, to go all the way along the front so you can easily see it. And it's, in this position, it's pretty hard to get up around the back of the joystick body, because that 2x4 is up there. But that's okay. We'll reposition in just a minute to be able to reach the other sides. And then this is the point when I notice a screw hole from where I had clamped these scrap pieces together with a screw. I didn't have enough C-clamps to hold all the way the full length of these boards, so these were just very sloppily held together. But that's okay. We're going to grab these scraps and try to turn into something cool. And now is the time when we start to really get some of the smooth shapes. Using sandpaper on a block like this is much slower than using the belt sander, but it gives you a lot more control to kind of sneak up on the shape that you're looking for. You can see me smack the block of sandpaper to shake out all the sawdust. You got to keep your sandpaper clean, and I don't want to do any wet sanding on this at this stage. So the best I can do is just smack it to get that dust out. Now we start to see that you can start to really see what that smooth line will look like. And I'm sanding for the feel, of course, but also, sanding down from the top certain amounts to try to make the results be a nice, smooth visual line between those different layers, those different colors of wood. So now we'll pop it off of the pedestal and just change the angle a bit so that we can actually use the belt sander on the very back of the joystick. And this is me trying to find a good position. Yeah, something like this should be good. And then we can clean up that back edge, which we didn't have a chance to work on yet because the pedestal was in the way of the sander. Same thing as the front. I want to make sure that I bring all the little edges down to the same level so that it's a nice smooth surface with those beautiful stripes going along. And it starts to look really, really great when you come back with that 120 grit sandpaper on the sanding block. Really, really smooths out the transitions between those different types of wood. And at this point, I think we can say to our 2x4 pedestal, thank you for your service. We'll take it from here. And without too much trouble, we have a pretty good shape here. We can always, use the 120 grit sandpaper on the sanding block to just smooth out edges a little bit more until it feels like what we want. But then I'm noticing a few more holes, maybe from screws, from the rough assembly process. We might have to fill those later. But I think we have a pretty good joystick body. So now, let's talk about adding some buttons in here. These are, as I mentioned before, these are 24mm arcade buttons, which I usually prefer over the 30mm. And the drill bit that I have here, this Forstner bit, is not quite 24mm. It's a little bit smaller. After making this joystick, I just finally got with the program and ordered an actual 24mm Forstner bit. So I'll be ready the next time I want to make a joystick like this. But same thing. We want to kind of just go all the way through the wood here. Eventually, we're going to hit those larger cavities that are underneath. But from the top, what we really want is just a nice clean edge, 24mm diameter hole. So now it's like nice holes with a little shelf inside there. And we can test the button, but it doesn't quite fit. So back to the trusty Dremel. As I mentioned, my Forstner bit's not quite 24mm. So we have to make it just a little bit bigger with the Dremel and the sanding drum just to allow those buttons to fit all the way in. The second one fits. Maybe I'm noticing one of them is not quite flush all the way, but that's okay. We'll just have to probably use the Dremel to clean a little bit deeper. Take that 24mm hole all the way down. Then yeah, it's gonna fit much better. And then we can try dropping the joystick in there to see what that's going to feel like. Roughly position it and then, check from the top to see that you're going to have it centered within the hole. And then there's also this little plastic disc that goes around the top of the joystick to keep dust out. I like to put it underneath, rather than having it sitting on the top surface of the joystick. But what's tricky about that is that you need to have room for it to move around. So you can't really see it from this angle, but I did make sort of just a little extra recessed area just right around the joystick opening, big enough for that disc so that it can move side to side. It can kind of slide around in this little slot that is in between the top of the joystick mounting plate and the bottom of the wood surface at the top. Just a little room for it to slide around. And one very short screw on each of the four corners of that joystick mounting plate will hold this into place. You can see I put the other leftover joystick mounting plate in between there as kind of a big washer, just to add a little bit more space while I'm testing this. Because I really don't want those screws to poke out through the top of the wood surface here. But here we go, just screw on the ball on the top of the joystick, and this is pretty much what it's going to look like. But let's add some little rubber feet on the bottom so that when you're playing it doesn't slide around on your desk or table. And it would be nice to sort of recess these down into the wood a little bit. So I'll just mark places where they're going to go, use the trusty punch to locate the center of the drill bit, and then I'm going to use a smaller Forstner bit, which has a diameter that's about the same as these little rubber feet, to just make some nice little recesses that they can sit down in. Gives it a nice low profile look. So these need to all be, roughly the same depth. And I like to drill nice little pilot holes just so that the screws that mount these feet won't split the wood when we crank them down. Check the clearance, make sure these feet are high enough so that the bottom of the joystick won't hit the desk or table. And then it's wobbling a little bit at first, so I just need to pop out one of these feet and I just add a little washer underneath to try to even it out. And yep, there we go, it's stable. That's good enough for right now. I did some more finer sanding, with some, 600 and 1000 degree sandpaper. And now this is where it all pays off, when we do the finishing. But one of the most important things is that we have the proper equipment, like an N95 mask in this case, and also some safety goggles. And we need that because we're going to use this amazing clear coat. You have to buy this at a specialty shop, or you fortunately can get it on Amazon. It's from a company called SprayMax, and this is a 2K clear coat, which means that it actually has two different parts inside. You have a little button on the bottom that you have to push to kind of break this little container inside the can that releases the hardener into the clear. And that makes it so that when the finish dries, it is very, very hard, just like the clear coat on a car or on like an electric guitar. It will be much more durable than something you would buy at like a home improvement store, but it's also much more dangerous, which is why you absolutely have to have that eye protection and the N95 respirator, because you can't get this stuff in your lungs. It's very toxic. And you absolutely have to use this in a well-ventilated area. I always do it outdoors myself. If you do it inside, not only is that more dangerous for you, but you will get overspray, a fine mist of this hard clear coat will get on everything in the room. It's really crazy. But when used correctly, the results are fantastic. So look at this. When we lay this clear on this wood, the colors of the natural wood really, really come out. And there's no stain here. This is just the natural, from top to bottom. It's poplar, then oak, then a layer of pine, and then another poplar layer, then another layer of pine, and then poplar at the bottom. And these beautiful colors and the beautiful grain just comes out. And this 2K clear coat will preserve it, so it's going to look just as good forever. And you should lay on multiple thin coats. And since it does have that hardener inside, it hardens very quickly and allows you to do another coat after only about 10 minutes. And you just lay those on, let them harden at least for 24 hours, 48 hours would be better. And then you can get around to wet sanding to make it even smoother. So here, this is dried for a couple days at this point, and you can see it looks really great. You could just leave it here. It's durable, it feels nice, looks awesome, but it's not as smooth as it could be. So if we want to get that sort of glassy finish, then we need to wet sand it. And I just have, I think even a used piece of 1000 grit sandpaper here, and I just get it wet, and that helps keep the sandpaper clean so you can keep sanding. And then I just go along and just sand off any of those high points, any of that sort of orange peel texture that you can see. And it's important to periodically go back and clean your sandpaper out by dipping it back in that water to rinse out those little pieces of the clear coat that you're taking off onto the sandpaper, and then move on to progressively finer sandpapers. So this is the 1000 that I start with, but then not recorded here. I show when I go on to like a 2000 and a 3000 grit after that. And the goal is to sand it down to where it's completely level and consistent across the whole surface. You don't want to see when you hold it up at an angle and like look in the reflection, in the reflected light, you don't want to see any of those dark, shiny spots. You want to see entirely smooth, kind of foggy, matte surface left by the sandpaper. And that's where you come around and then use a buffing compound or polishing compound of some sort to make it really, really shiny. And you don't need any specialty power tools for any of this buffing or shining. You can do it all just with a rag and your hands. And here is the final product. This is really comfortable to use. It has a super durable clear finish, and I think it looks pretty awesome with the stripes showing off the 3 different kinds of wood that I used. So if you have any questions about anything in this video, please leave a comment and I'll do my best to respond right away and help you get started on your own project with the tools that you already have. Thanks for watching.